Fantastic. So thank you and welcome again to Vision Australia's webinar around support to access the NDIS and what the NDIS is. I'm Scott Jacobs. I'm the Program Manager for NDIS and Aged Care, which is a national role, but I'm based in our Coorparoo office just outside of Brisbane. I'm also joined today by Caitlin.
Hi everyone, my name's Caitlin McMorrow. I'm the National Operations Lead for NDIS at Vision Australia, and I'm also based in our Coorparoo office in Brisbane.
Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, so today, just a bit of an overview. We will be presenting with this PowerPoint slide, but we'll describe everything that comes on screen and read out any text. We're also going to share a fair bit of extra information as well. For those who are joining, there will be opportunities for questions and there's a webinar chat. If you type them in as we go, we'll be able to answer them throughout. Today, we're going to give a bit of an overview of what the NDIS is and how it works, how to find out if you're eligible for the NDIS, and then as a result, how to apply for NDIS access. We'll also give a brief overview on preparing for your first plan and how Vision Australia can support that, the types of support that are available through your NDIS plan, and then how Vision Australia can help you to make the most of understanding your plan and make the most of funding. To kick us off with a discussion around what the NDIS is, I will pass back to Caitlin.
Thanks, Scott. So the NDIS is a new way of providing funding to support people with disability. And the way it works is that the activities and services and support that you need are directly funded through an individualised package that's quite tailored to your personal situation and goals. So this is quite different from the previous block funding that was used to access a lot of disability services in the past. So when we had that funding, service providers would essentially receive a prescribed amount of money through government grants and other programs and things like that. And that money would then be used to provide services to you. Under the NDIS, it works a bit differently. So that money now goes to you as an individual instead, so that you can choose the supports that you want to receive. One impact of that is that to continue accessing services from organisations such as Vision Australia, because we no longer have that block funding, you may be required to apply to the NDIS or to pay for some of the services that you receive. So the NDIS was introduced through a staged national rollout across Australia, and that's now more or less complete. There are a few key principles which underpin the scheme, if you like, and I might talk through those now. So the first one is that the NDIS is an insurance model. And that's really the idea that disability can affect anyone at any time. So we all share that risk, and we all share the cost through the premiums that we pay each year as taxpayers. The other aspect of it being an insurance model is that the NDIS has quite a focus on capacity building. So building your skills and preventative support and things like that, the idea being that you may need fewer supports over time. The second principle of the scheme is around choice and control. And that's really an acknowledgement of the fact that people with disability didn't always previously have the freedom to meet their needs in the way that they wanted. So they could really only receive the services that providers felt that they wanted and could offer. So the NDIS is quite focused on your individual needs, and it won't fund services that you don't want or that you don't get value from. The third principle of the scheme is around reasonable and necessary supports. So the necessary part of that means that any supports that are funded as part of your individualised package, be that equipment or services or whatever it might be, those need to be related to your disability. So the NDIS doesn't cover things like your daily living costs, and any informal supports that you receive from family and friends and things like that will be taken into account as well in working out what you need. The reasonable part of reasonable and necessary means that the NDIS will try to remove economic barriers that happen because of your disability, but the scheme won't duplicate funding from other support systems that all Australians have access to. So for example, if a support was better funded through healthcare or education or something that everyone can access, those systems would still be expected to be used. The fourth principle is around person-centeredness, and that's really the idea that the NDIS is focused on goals. So any supports or services that you access through your NDIS plan have to be linked to a goal. If those supports aren't linked to a goal, they won't be funded. You decide what your goals will be, though, so they're quite centered around what you personally need and around your choice. And the final principle is around linking in with mainstream services. So the NDIS aims to take quite a holistic look at your support needs, and it will try to link you in with supports and activities in your local community and things like that, as well as disability-specific ones. So I might hand back to Scott now to talk a little bit about what the NDIS might mean for you.
Thanks, Caitlin. So, as Caitlin touched on previously, the NDIS means that most of the disability organisations, such as Vision Australia, that previously received block funding to provide services to you, no longer have access to that funding. You may find that if you're eligible to receive support under the NDIS, but you choose not to do so, then many organisations may only be able to provide you with limited services or might require you to pay or contribute to the cost of your services. However, what the NDIS also means for you directly is that you'll have a lot greater choice and control. This is both about who and where you access services from. Supports will be more tailored towards your individual needs and goals, so you can be a little bit more innovative or imaginative in how you choose to use your funding. The NDIS also has a really big focus on capacity building, so it's a great opportunity to learn new skills, get involved in new activities, and find new ways to build your independence. You might also find that there are a whole range of supports which you can access funding for the first time. This can include in-home supports, community access, or similar supports to that, and we'll go through some more detailed examples of that in a moment. But examples of this can be around helping with gardening or cleaning at home, or a support worker to assist you with shopping, attending your local farmers markets or a football game, things of that nature. The NDIS can also fund assistive technology, and this can range from simple items such as a liquid level indicator or talking scales, through to more complex items such as braille devices and desktop magnifiers. So we are going to take a brief break in the presentation to answer some questions. We have had some come through ahead of time. A reminder that in the Zoom webinar chat, you will be able to post some questions and ask any questions. Again, please refrain from too many personal details, but otherwise we would welcome as many as you have. So I might kick off with one from a registrant for today's webinar. Caitlin, could you answer this for the participants? How can I get a case manager back in my NDIS plan?
Okay, so the equivalent, so NDIS doesn't talk about case management as such, but the way they talk about that kind of service, they call it support coordination. It's a little bit different to case management in that the role of a support coordinator under NDIS is really to help you build your capacity to manage your supports yourself. So it's not so much about that person organising all of the supports for you, but they will help you to do that yourself and to learn any skills that you might need to kind of facilitate that for you. So it's called support coordination under NDIS rather than case management. If you haven't received that in your plan, there are a couple of options. Both would involve a plan review. So that's an option that's always available to you if you don't feel that you got the supports or services that you needed in your plan. There are a couple of ways you can do it. You could either wait until your NDIS plan is due for renewal and then talk with your planner next time around about that support coordination service and why you think it would help you. The other option is to conduct an unscheduled plan review. So you can do that at any time during your plan. So if it's a scenario where you feel like you really need that support straight away, rather than waiting till your plan comes up for renewal, you might choose that option.
Thanks, Caitlin. And that process is true for any plan where you find that the supports don't quite match your needs. You would go through a similar approach. In the next section of the webinar, we'll talk a little bit about that preparation for your planning meeting to make sure that, as far as possible, the plan meets your needs and includes all of the supports that you're seeking. We've also had a question come through around accessible formats, particularly for your first plan. This webinar participant has been told that it's not possible to get both a Word version and a PDF version as well as the Braille of the plan. So around about a year ago, maybe a touch longer now, the NDIA started producing participant plans in the preferred format of your choice, and Braille was one of the options. You can also receive at least one electronic copy. We're not responsible or entirely clear on how the NDIA might restrict access to multiple different formats of an electronic copy. We'd encourage you to raise this with your local area coordinator, who will be your first point of contact with the agency around your plan, and request that you have all of them, Braille, PDF and Word. Alternatively, you may be stuck and require to rely on just the Word document version as well as your Braille copy. But it is something that the agency will need to address. So Helen asks how we'll go about making the plan and who I need to approach, which is the point that we'll be answering in the next section. So might hold off answering that one for now, Helen, but keep an eye out. There may be further questions you have after we've presented that. Caitlin, we've had a question from a participant whose vision has deteriorated over the last 18 months and is interested to know what daily living skills could be provided by Vision Australia and what, if any, specialist counsellors are available to deal with the ensuing anxiety and depression.
Yeah, so there are quite a few services that Vision Australia could potentially offer in that space. One thing that we do a lot of is peer support, and there are a few different ways you can do that. You can either chat with someone one-on-one over the phone, and generally you'll be matched up with someone who's either perhaps got a similar vision condition or similar interests and has had a similar life experience to you, if you like. So when you talk to the peer support team, they'll match you up with someone based on what you tell us is important to you. So that's one option. The other support that we have is quality living groups. Those are really useful often for people who have had a recent change in their vision or who are quite new to their vision loss. And really the focus of those is partly on providing emotional support, so people who are going through a similar kind of situation to you, but also some practical strategies about how you might be able to manage that change in your vision, so things that you could do differently at home, just a chance to talk with other people really about how they manage in similar situations, which can be really helpful. Obviously, we'd also have things like occupational therapy services. So that might include things like coming out to your home and having a look at what lighting you've got to, make the most of the vision that you still have. Any strategies for kind of helping you to manage in the kitchen, so marking up appliances and things like that. We also have orientation and mobility, so those are services which can help you to navigate the community a bit more safely. It could be a white cane if you're ready for that, but if not, just some general strategies about tips and things that you could use to make sure you're still able to get around safely. In terms of counselling, that varies a little bit in availability from region to region. So that would depend on where you are as to whether that's something Vision Australia could offer. But if it's not available in your region, then we'd certainly recommend that you approach an external provider for that counselling if we can't do it for you.
Thanks, Caitlin. And those quality living groups and the peer support have particularly high quality reviews. People seem to get a lot out of them, being able to connect with peers and understand the way to continue living a normal life. One other question has come through around the plan reviews. So it's being expected to fill out a weekly activity schedule, and understandably it can be difficult to predict your activities when things might change on a regular basis. Our next webinar is going to look at the plan review process in a lot more detail, including preparing for it. What we would be recommending now, rather than predicting what you will be using from the first point of your plan to the end of it, instead just keep a tracker and record of the services you do access during that year, and maybe make some notes as to whether there's reasons why you may be unable to access all the services you wanted, things of that nature, so that when it comes time for your plan review, you can communicate that to the planner or the LAC, the local area coordinator, and they can understand how your needs may have changed or may be the same for the next year. Okay, so what we might do is there's a couple of other questions, but we will come back to questions at the end. So we'll hold those over until the end of the webinar. Please make sure to keep sending questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar into the Zoom chat, and we will do our best to get to them at the end. For now, we'll move on to the next section around getting and using your NDIS plan. And on screen, there are 6 main steps the NDIA, National Disability Insurance Agency, kind of expect you to cover off ahead of actually getting and using your plan and then the process of using it. They are understanding how the NDIS works, understanding if you're eligible, understanding how to apply, creating your first plan, using that plan, and then going through a review. And we are going to be focusing on the middle two, so how to apply and creating your first plan. Speaking of which, around how to access the NDIS, I will pass back to Caitlin.
Thanks, Scott. So this part probably comes back to Helen's question from earlier, I think. So let us know if you have any more questions, Helen, once we've talked through this bit. The first thing that you need to do is check whether you're eligible to access the NDIS. So there are a couple of things that need to apply here. First of all, you need to be aged under 65 when you sign up for the scheme. You'd also need to be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident, and you need to be able to demonstrate that you have an impairment or a condition that's likely to mean that you need lifelong support from the NDIS. So essentially that means you need to have a condition that's likely to be permanent. Once you've figured out if you're eligible, the next step in the process is to complete what's called an access request form. And as part of that, as well as some of your personal information and things like that, you'll be required to provide evidence of your disability. So depending on your situation, something like a GP report or an ophthalmologist report may be sufficient, particularly if you're legally blind. If you have low vision or your disability or your needs are a little bit more complex, the NDIS may sometimes ask for some additional information to help them understand what the functional impact of your vision impairment is, so the day-to-day impact of it on your life, really. Once you've completed your access request form, you'll be notified whether you've been approved for access to the scheme. And if you are, then the next step is that you'll be booked in for a planning meeting with either your local area coordinator or an NDIA planner. And this is really a chance for you to talk to the NDIS about your goals and the types of supports that you think you will need. It's really important to be prepared and to have a think about your goals beforehand, before you go to that meeting with your planner. So we do recommend that you do some plan preparation first. And this is actually one of the areas where Vision Australia can help you. So I might pass back to Scott to talk about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Caitlin. So as has been discussed, it's essential to be well prepared for your planning meeting so you can get the best funding outcome possible. But it doesn't need to be an overwhelming process. And that's why Vision Australia has developed our ReadySet tool, which is a unique planning tool. When you work with us to use ReadySet, you'll have an appointment and a meeting with a Vision Australia expert on the NDIS who will be able to provide answers to any questions you might have about funding and how to use it. They can provide support to you in setting goals, and not just setting goals, but translating those goals into language that relate to NDIS supports. They provide information on the full range of services available from Vision Australia and helps to identify other supports that are commonly used by people who are blind or have low vision. Importantly, At the end of this process, you will have a service estimate document in the format of your choice. This is a document that you can take with you to your NDIS planning meeting, and it contains information about all of the services and supports you might need, and enables your planner to understand both how they link to your goals and how they'll help you achieve your goals. And they're framed again in language that the NDIS understands as well. Most importantly, this service estimate is built by you to help make sure you get the best possible funding outcome. And the general feedback we've had from local area coordinators and NDIA planning delegates is quite positive, that it has been very useful in helping people to understand what can be quite specialist supports for blindness and low vision. To give you an example of how all of this comes together, Caitlin's going to spend some time running through a client case study, so you can see from start to finish, understanding access to the NDIS and what supports might be translated into a plan. Caitlin?
Thanks, Scott. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story first about our client, Robin Banks, and then we'll talk through some of the ways that the ReadySet tool could help him. So Robin has optic atrophy and he's been legally blind for 25 years. He's thinking about applying for the NDIS, but he's not quite sure how the scheme will help him. Robin feels that he's quite independent already. He navigates his neighbourhood quite confidently using his white cane, and he walks his kids to and from school. Robin's vision has deteriorated over the last 5 years, so he's found it a bit challenging to keep up with some of his hobbies and interests. He used to love reading, but he now finds that it causes him too much visual fatigue. He also enjoyed cooking in the past, but he now struggles to identify items in the fridge and pantry, and sometimes needs to rely on his wife and kids a little bit more than he'd like to help him find things. Robin is a pretty confident computer user, and since his vision deteriorated, he's been teaching himself to use JAWS, which is a text-to-speech screen reading piece of software. So Robin's completed his access request form, and he's been approved for access to the NDIS. He knows that it's really important to be prepared for his planning meeting with the NDIA, so he first comes to Vision Australia for a planning discussion. So Mary is the Vision Australia expert who's assigned to work with Robin, and she uses the ReadySet tool to help him figure out his goals and identify some of the services that might assist him. So let's talk a little bit about some of the services that Robin and Mary identified. So first of all, Robin learns about the Vision Australia library service, which would enable him to access audio books. So as we recall, he used to like reading and now finds that a bit challenging. He also finds out that there are many assistive technology devices that can help him with reading and identifying items in the kitchen. So in Robin's planning document, Mary includes a cost estimate for him to work with an access technology specialist to talk about some of his options. Robin also discovers that he could work with an occupational therapist to regain his confidence with cooking. So there are lots of strategies he could learn to make sure he's able to manage safely in the kitchen and have utensils and ingredients organised so that he can find them easily. Mary includes information in Robin's planning document about occupational therapy services and how these can help him to achieve his goals, so that when he goes to his planning meeting, his planner understands a bit more about what those services are for and how they might assist him. Robin's pretty confident about navigating his local neighbourhood. However, he tells Mary that his oldest son will be starting high school next year, so he'll need to learn some new travel routes. Mary is able to include a recommendation for 15 hours of orientation and mobility services to help Robin with this goal. As we mentioned earlier, Robin's a pretty confident computer user, and he already has a copy of JAWS and has been teaching himself how to use it. He tells Mary, though, that he's still not very confident about looking things up on the internet, and he'd really like to get better at this so that he can look up recipes and help his kids out with their homework assignments. So Mary includes a service estimate in Robin's planning document for 10 hours of assistive technology training. There are also a few local bands that Robin likes, and he tells Mary that he never goes to their gigs because he finds these events tricky to navigate by himself. He's also interested in taking part in a local cycling group, but feels he'll need some additional support to help manage this. So Robin and Mary talk about options for a support worker to attend concerts and the local cycling group with him so that he can still participate in these things when he wants to. Robin's family also have quite a large garden, and he finds this a bit difficult to maintain by himself. So Mary lets him know that the NDIS may be able to fund some in-home support to help with the gardening on a weekly or fortnightly basis. So these are just a few examples of how plan preparation using a tool like ReadySet can help a client like Robin to set some new goals, but also think about ways to build on the skills that he already has. Mary doesn't just talk to him about Vision Australia services, they actually have a really great conversation about his needs more generally, and she's able to recommend several other supports that he might also find valuable. So that's a bit of an example of how the ReadySet tool might work and how it could assist you in developing some ideas around your NDIS plan. I might hand back to Scott now to talk a little bit more about what happens once you actually have your plan.
Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, so just another reminder to put in any questions you have to the webinar chat. We'll come to those in a short while. Now, you've got your plan. What happens next? The first part is that you can start to choose the supports that you want to access and the providers that you want to work with. After 12 months, you'll have that plan review with the NDIA, and that's a chance to talk about how you went meeting your goals and the needs for your next plan. As mentioned, we'll talk about that in more detail in a future webinar, including how you can prepare for your review. So Vision Australia can help you in a range of ways. We've spoken a little bit about how we can assist you to access services. We can help you understand the funding in your plan and the ways you can use it. And we can also assist you in preparing for your plan review. Caitlin's provided a number of examples and a couple of as part of the case study for Robin. Here is on screen a list of the various service types that we might offer, all of which can be connected through the NDIS in some manner. We have emotional and support groups for social inclusion, occupational therapists for independence, mobility specialists to stay safe and get around, and orthoptists to assess functional vision and make recommendations. We also provide education and employment support to achieve aspirations, and that can support in connecting different funding sources where you may have children in schools who can't access the NDIS for that, but have other funding types to make sure there's a continuum of services. We have aids and equipment, assistive technology from our shop to improve daily living, and we also provide training to help you stay connected. There's early intervention children's services, adolescent specialised services as well. We have Seeing Eye Dogs for independence, audiobooks and library for leisure and learning, and helpful information advice for clients and families. And as we mentioned, the NDIS specialists, particularly those who can support you with your ReadySet plan if you need to. I mentioned briefly there is Vision Australia's online store. We also have some retail stores in the offices. Using your NDIS plan, either through an assessment or the consumables funding, you may be able to access a range of different devices to support you with independence and meeting your goals. So well worth checking out. Before we move on to questions, a very brief summary of what we've been through, and there have been some great questions coming through, so please keep that going. We've given an overview of what the NDIS is and how it works, hopefully demystifying some of it for some of you. We've also helped to understand if you're eligible or not, how to apply for NDIS access, and the process of preparing for your first plan. We've also talked a little bit about the types of support that may be available to you through your NDIS plan, and how Vision Australia can help you to make the most of that and make the most of your funding as well. Lastly, to book in your planning session, or if you would like support with access to the NDIS, you can contact us. You can either call our National Contact Centre on 1300 84 74 66. You can email info@visionaustralia.org. And if you've already been connected to us, then you can always contact your local office and your service provider for that support as well. So thank you all for participating. We will take some final questions now, and there's a few that have come through. And a reminder that this has been recorded and will be shared online and both with you as a link. Before we move into questions as well, the last reminder that I have to give to you is that there will be a short survey that pops up when the webinar is finished. We'd love for you to complete it because it will help us understand both how useful this was for you and whether there's other topics that would be of interest for you in the future. And on that, just to let you know, because we have had a number of people who have requested this be a different time slot because middle of the day sometimes can be a bit harder. Our aim is to try and run the next webinar in the evening so that we can cover a different group as well. It will be recorded though, so if you have something on at that point, you'll be able to listen in. Okay, so we have a question from Delanjali to us around the importance of a service agreement and explaining why we need to have one. Caitlin, would you be able to take that?
Sure. So once you get your NDIS plan and you start choosing service providers, those providers will usually ask you to sign a service agreement. The NDIS generally requires all providers to have one with you. And the purpose of it really is to make sure that everyone's clear about what services you want to receive, how many hours that will take if it's a service where that's relevant, and what those services cost. So really that's the purpose of a service agreement. It also generally has some information in it to make sure you understand what the complaints process is if you're not happy with the services that you receive, and what both you and your provider are agreeing to do as part of making sure that that service is successful for you. So in a nutshell, that's the purpose of the document. It's really to make sure that everyone's clear about what services you want to receive and how they're going to be delivered.
Terrific, thank you. We've had a question from David around where do New Zealanders sit as it relates to the NDIS? David, this one is potentially a little bit of a tricky question. Generally, for people who are not Australian citizens, there might be a pathway to access the NDIS, but it can be quite specific and there's very strict criteria around it. I would recommend you get in touch with the NDIA. You can also have a look on their website where they provide some fairly detailed information about the residency requirements and any of the special protected category visas that may apply and grant you eligibility for the NDIS. But that one I would recommend chasing up some expert advice from the agency around access. Caitlin, Amy asks us, or says that we're already linked with our Vision Australia office, which is fantastic. Apparently they're quite wonderful, but they haven't heard about the ReadySet program, or at least Amy hasn't. How can Amy get connected with a ReadySet expert?
So if you're already linked in with your local office, Amy, that's great. The first step would probably be for you to give them a call. If there's a service provider that you're already working with, you could have a chat with them and let them know that you're interested in ReadySet, or any of the staff at your local office should be able to point you in the right direction. If you've already got an NDIS plan, the ReadySet program can be used to help you prepare for a plan review as well.
Excellent, thanks. I did see someone, I think it might have been Adrian, raise their hand. Unfortunately, that doesn't allow us to do anything. So if you had a question, you'll need to type it into the chat box. We've also had a question from Sarah Darcy around how service fees are determined. So I'm surprised by that price as well. Up to $500 for 45 minutes seems quite exorbitant. So the agency sets a price. They have a price guide that gets updated once a year. At the moment, for the majority of children's service therapies, they would be capped at $193.99 per hour. That will be applied in different ways. That's the cap. Some providers may charge less than that. Others would provide up to that cost. If you are self-managed with your plan, and we haven't talked today about the different funding or management options within plans, but you can review our previous webinar, which is on YouTube. We did go into some detail on that, or again, speak to one of our experts. But in that webinar, we discussed the management options. And if you're self-managed, then you can access providers who are not registered with the NDIS. They're also then not bound by the price caps. but I still would be, if I was in your position, I'd be having a conversation and negotiating around a price that high, because that is well and outside of the standard price offering. So in short, providers generally apply the price caps that are already in place by the agency, as does Vision Australia. Dulanji also has a follow-up question around his son who already has Better Start funding, and does he still need to request acceptance to apply for NDIS and go through a normal access pathway? Caitlin, would you be able to take that?
Sure, though you might have a little bit more information on that than I do. It's my understanding that Better Start funding will eventually transition across to NDIS. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the plan. So it may take a little bit longer than had originally been put in place, but Dulanji, it does appear that they will that will end and you would receive funding through the NDIS instead. In the meantime, you will get different types of support from Better Start than you would from NDIS, and different funding levels. So you'd probably be best to have a conversation with your service provider around what is the most suitable one to help meet your son's needs. Amy asks if we know the name of the YouTube video we mentioned for the previous webinar. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll ask one of my colleagues to have a look.
I think if you look up the Vision Australia YouTube channel, it'll probably come up on there.
And it should be one of the newer videos on that, so that might be worth having a look at there. One question from Sarah, which Caitlin, if you would be comfortable taking, is around what happens when BA make recommendations for adjustments, supports, or provide reports, but the NDIS denies the claim, then denies a review. But as far as Sarah's concerned, it's a necessary home service or home modification.
Okay, that's an interesting one. I've not heard of the NDIS denying a review. That's a little bit unusual, I would think. Generally, that review process would be your first port of call. There is an internal appeals process that you can go through with the agency, and generally you would need to exhaust that option first. If that doesn't achieve the outcome that you're looking for, there's also an external appeals process that you could go through, and that involves taking the issue to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. So that might be an option for you as well if all the internal options for review have been exhausted. Depending on what the issue is, Vision Australia may be able to provide some support with that, and there are lots of other external advocacy organisations who can help with those Administrative Appeals Tribunal applications as well. Yeah, because they can be a little bit complex to get your head around. So would be worth seeking some support from us or from another advocacy provider if you want to go down that path.
Yes, thank you very much, Caitlin. Amy, the title of that webinar on YouTube was Making the Most of Your NDIS Plan. So you should be able to find that. And I think it is our second video up on the YouTube channel. So hopefully that will help. We've had a couple of questions come in around where someone might have multiple disabilities or different competing needs through the NDIS. Generally, when you're asked to access, you will be requested to nominate a primary disability. It doesn't mean that you can't reference or seek support for multiple disability types, but usually they will request that you nominate a disability type that is having the most impact on your daily life or the biggest functional impact. They usually say functional impact is the language that gets used. So it can be a little bit tricky. Generally, though, as long as you're quite clear in articulating that you have multiple disabilities and that they have different competing needs, or that they may have similar needs, you might need an OT for different aspects of your life, and highlighting the total sum of what you need support for should be a good step in making sure you get the most funding. Again, coming to Vision Australia for support with our ReadySet tool, we can have conversations with you to make sure we account for all of those needs. Okay, so we might finish up there. Any other questions we will attempt to answer later. Alternatively, at the very least, this webinar will be shared and hopefully that will allow you to review and it might assist. I would encourage you again to get in touch with your local Vision Australia office if you would like support in either having a ReadySet session or to access the NDIS, and encourage you all to access the NDIS and take advantage of the wonderful supports that you can get through it. There will be a survey that pops up, as I mentioned. Please finish that. It would be wonderful to hear how you have found this webinar and any other future topics you'd like. But thank you very much for attending and participating. It's been great to have you along today and taking some time out during lunch. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.